Welcome everybody to 52 Living Ideas. We are going through the design way. And more importantly, we are trying to learn how to design, how to design ourselves. So I have subtitled the series, You Are a Designing Animal. And that's what we are doing. This book is incredibly rich. And it comes at design from multiple perspectives. So we are taking a very unusual path, a spiral path through the book. So we are on our first spiral. We started out with the first traditions. So the spiral goes through, the part 5, then part 3, then part 2, and part 4. So we rotate through the parts. And so far, it's been working pretty well. First, I was a little bit concerned about how it would be like when we jump directly into composing and connecting, but it worked out really well. So we have started with first traditions, composing and connecting. Now we are looking at ultimate particular, which is actually replacing the fragmented way in which we think, where we separate the material world and regard it as just material. And then we have ideas which are separated from it. This is a way of integrating the ideal and the real in one. And then after that, we are going to go to desiderata, which is a very crucial concept that completes our first spiral. The next spiral, we will start with splendors of design. And I will go ahead and put the entire program on the meetup pages so you can prepare. The important thing is that you can go through the book in whatever order that you find useful. And on Thursdays, you'll be able to talk about your own experience of going through the book, your own experience of design, and we can learn from each other. So this is a deep dive into a book, and we are trying to see how we can actually leverage the book. All right, so with that, I'm going to start with Jing. If you're not ready, I'm going to talk a little bit. How much time do you need? Okay. Okay, Becky is ready to start. Becky, go ahead.
Okay, so this one was a collaboration with Joe. I want to start with this figure 1.3, and that's the ideal, which is the your desire, what you want. You start off with what you want. It's the vision, and through that you filter it through the facts of what is all your constraints, and out comes your real, your ultimate particulars with an S. So let me just draw that in. Filter and constraints. So this is the process on 1.3. And so the key here is that change has occurred, because change defined was like the emergence and the creation of something. So from your desiderata came your ultimate particulars. So a change has occurred. So here we say change is difference. Change is. So change is difference. And that's not where it stops. You have one more arrow from the real the real back to the ideal through an iteration process. So now you've created your first loop and you're doing it again. So you're iterating through. And through the second iteration, what you're injecting would be more information, perhaps stakeholder feedback to help you redo your ideal a little bit. Now you're incorporating more information, maybe a different set of facts, and your ultimate particulars, which before were many, are starting to order themselves and rank, well, which one's more possible, which one's less possible. And you continue that iteration. That first iteration versus the second iteration, well, what is that? That's another change, but a change of difference is process. So let me just write that down. So we went from change is difference to change of difference is process. And now over time, you keep going with your iterations, but perhaps something else you're going to incorporate. Time changes, culture changes, other things change. And that iteration means that the change of your process is going to be evolution. So as you continue, this evolves. And finally, the change of evolution is design. But what comes out of all this iteration, what emerges is that here you get your ideal solution. And down here, you before had all these different schemas. They've ranked themselves of over time. And what emerged from there was your final schema, which is your ultimate particular. So that's what I ended up getting out of it. And then that was figure 9.6. And let me just finish up the diagram real quick. So this thing comes your ideal solution. And down here emerges your one ultimate particular. And where do you cut this off? We talked about it last time, that it wasn't based off of perfection or efficiency. It was more practical. It was based off of adequacy, essentiality, and significance is when you cut off that iteration. That's it.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Becky. And thank you, Joel. Next up is going to be Jing. And folks, we would like to hear what you're getting from the chapter. So go ahead and type an exclamation mark if you'd like to share. We're going to start. Give me just a second. I'm going to make her a co-host so she can share. All right. Jing, go ahead.
Can you see it?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, so today just go over the chapter 1, ultimate particular. So at the beginning, the book mentioned about the difference about discovery versus creation or design. Discovery is about science. You find something true. Versus design, creation, you find something real and ultimate particular. The one is based on observation, the other based on imagination. And in the theoretical world of science, we're always looking for natural law, truth, and it's discovery all these things behind the phenomenon. And in the real world, at the present environment, we not just discover the natural law or universal truth, but we also have to create something unnatural, non-natural or artificial, which is real, unique, and singular. So I use these two pictures as example. One is the universe, which is truth. And then the city we create, which can be any possibilities we want. It's a very futuristic city. So our city, our cars, our houses, and social organization, they all realities. They're unique, singular, temporary existence. There's no right answer. It's all based on human judgment. Different from science, which is based on truth. So the science has a good guidance for the judgment, help us to integrate all the understanding. But there's no clear, correct choice in design. That's very important for us to understand. So that's the difference between the design and the science. There's no right design to be discovered. That's very different from scientific approach. So design is creating something not exist. It's not discovery. Science can provide knowledge of existing things, confirm the potential as guidelines, but only through intention, imagination, and innovation we can create. So the truth doesn't provide us with one clear and correct answer. So then there's a good design judgment. So there are a lot of training about how to help you to get the skill. Workshops, it's like recipes with design thinking, but it's all rule-based. Work with limited limitation in the real world. So Roger Martin mentioned the mystery of design. Actually, you have to return to unscripted approach to design. So it's kind of, we discussed a lot about order and chaos in Jordan Peterson. So human always desire for consistency, predictability. But in the traditional source of wisdom, like Bible or tarot card or other things, they always talk in parables, they mentioned. It's open to interpretation. So when we look for more accessible, straightforward, accurate, consistent information, very hard to get. That's why, Shirkan always said, ask questions. Questions more important than answers. It's kind of the approach, how we approach this unknown world. The Western society tradition, we always look for right answer, use rational thought, use scientific method. It works pretty well in natural world and technology. So the science approach is about true, a general and universal, very abstract. So it can use that reason for from ultimate particular. So we use induction to find universal principle and law from the ultimate particular examples. And we explain the particular is universal through deduction. But when we create ultimate particular, this scientific approach won't work, either induction or deduction. So it's a singular, unique composition assembly. We talk about, composition assembly before. So I use this image to present the principle versus real. So I'm not sure it's a proper one, but I found it quite interesting. The principle is kind of the structure behind the thing, and the real human is very particular, each one of them. And they talk about, further explain the ultimate particular. The specific design approach at the specific time and space, we create this ultimate particular unique design. Either chair, curriculum, or policies, they can never be universal. So I use this virtual design museum, which I visited about 16 years ago. It's, you can see this chair museum, you can see all kinds of chairs. They all unique. They have some universal things shared between them, so we can all know they are chairs, but they are very different. Same as this building by Frank Gehry. It's very unique. So design process is moving from universal, general particular to ultimate particular through the design judgment. And it's the design process is very important to have design will, design intention, with the judgment, guide through the judgment. And then you create from abstract to ultimate particular, create this reality in the world. So design never deal with universal truth. That is philosophy. But it deal with particular, which is real. I want to mention actually the best architect, Louis Kahn. He's a philosopher. I think there's somebody said anybody who become the best in any field end up become philosopher. I think there's also something universal, but they have to use their own own discipline to display that universal truth through their design or whatever they're doing, instead of abstract things. So the true abstract is a pattern. So it's from abstract reasoning and logic. The real particular action with specific judgment is distinct intention. So design needs decision and action. They have to integrate with true, real, and ideal. So my understanding is everything real has some truth in there, but truth cannot represent all the real. And there's a different form of inquiry. We are trying to find truth. There's scientific method, which very prominent in Western culture, which was very successful in technology age. It's actually since become today's new religion. Churchman, you try to use this design system of rational inquiry that used in philosophy approach, try to use in design, search for knowledge with rational approach based on rules, which cannot be very successful. Scientific knowledge, critical examination, reflection is valuable during the design process, but it's not solely reliant on that. Design tradition have different paths. So it's based on what's possible, what's needed, and what's desired, and have what eventually outcome of all this through all this process. There's different inquiry they mentioned about in the human history. There's a scientific inquiry, there's spiritual inquiry, and there's some intuition through intuition. So inquiry through intuition is more subconscious knowledge, again through unification of complex sense data, integrated understanding of real-time experience. So the book asks if design is between intuition, logic, imagination, and reason. Is that in the middle point? It's actually not that simple. Actually, design is compound form of inquiry about true, real, and ideal. So I try to use these pictures to represent what's true, real, and ideal. This is my understanding. I found it's quite funny. So the ideal is about norm and value, ought to be desired, closest to possible idealistic desire. So this David sculpture is what's ideal. So it helps to reflection, abstraction, conceptual inquiry, action, and creating. The true is artist, religion, and science. A scientific method, we all look for truth. It have a long history of intellectual development. So I use skeleton as truth. What's behind all the human body, that's how we made. So we need integrated approach between true, real, and ideal. That's the design. It's synergetic, comprehensive, and integrative approach create this compound result. So this is the real human body, which is not perfect. But once we have, and this is true, that's human skeleton structure. Like no matter how much exercise you get, you may not have these long legs because your structure doesn't work. That's truth. But then you have this ideal image you want to be, you keep exercising, and then you get a unique design of yourself. So you get this something closer to an ideal, but it's never ideal. That's my understanding. So I try to use it to explain it. I'm not sure is that the book's intention. That's my guess. So design inquiry is both journey and the destination. So you have to go through this design process, making all the changes, but you also have to have some outcome in reality, bring something real in reality. So change coming from existent is genesis and creation. So there's different type of change. In reality, we interaction to make change. In truth and scientific, there's a chance, necessity, we have to change. But in ideal world, is human intention lead to change. And the book mentioned the heart of design is actually human intention. It's very essential to the design change. So it's caused human to proactively, purposely interact with the real world. So we create something with intention. That's the whole reason of design. So design change include bring new things to existing or modify already existing things. That's actually anything new is actually based something in reality, even though, so they said the best artist is still some master's work, but they make it in their own unique forms. So it's become new. So any new thing is actually based on something existence. So design as a holistic approach. So the outcome inquiry is knowledge. Depends on the model of inquiries we're using. So there's a design knowledge come from conscious not knowing. So we have to design with this open mind, empty mind. When we started, so intentionally not knowing where we can't have all the answer before we design, then we cannot open to all the possibilities. Then we use reasoning, conscious knowing. We have reasoning, we have logic, then we have to use intuition, which is unconscious knowledge. And also imagination is subconscious knowledge. For example, when we design a house, we have to reason, we have to have certain functions we have to fulfill. We have the living room, bedroom, the people need how many, whatever they want in their house. Then we have, oh, sorry. Then we have to use this our intuition. So we feel what works with the environment. And also we have imagination, what's possible in this environment. We create something ideal based on the real and ultimate truth. And through the scientific analysis, the difference between the scientific analysis is reduction is true, but in design, we need to use holistic sense. What's whole, what's real, which I think is not only applied to architecture design, but also even in medical field right nowadays, there's holistic medical treatment, which we found more helpful actually in some way. The new design is too complex and rich to understand the whole process. So it's from real to particular, ultimate particular, through the approach of judgment versus truth. The design thinking, we have to combine the scientific truth and our judgment. The judgment based on human experience, which is very subjective. The scientific truth is objective. So we have to combine both of this. So through this balanced compound approach of inquiry, true, real, and ideal, we can have this good design process. That's my understanding. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Jing. All right, folks, go ahead and type exclamation mark if you would like to share what you got from this chapter. Charlie.
Yeah, I approach this somewhat from a philosophical point of view, but let's start off with the idea that the ultimate particulars are what are the grist, so to speak, for making patents. Okay, when you get a patent, you have to show a particular object, okay, an instantiation of your idea, that from that you will own that particular, that ultimate particular, okay, that will be your property, that nobody can copy, okay, that's yours, okay. But recently, okay, there has been
Hi, let me interrupt for a second. Jing, could you stop sharing?
Oh, I thought I did. Sorry. Where is it?
Go ahead,
Oh,
Charlie.
okay.
yeah. I'm going to put up a thing on the chat, a couple of URLs that are relevant to what I'm just saying. Where am I? Okay, there we go. So anyway, so you got this ultimate particular. That's supposed to be traditionally when the Constitution was first set up and the whole idea of the U.S. Patent Office, it was understood that you had to have a physical device, okay, that you could patent. Now you can patent ideas, okay, and the way I see it is this whole issue about the real and the true has become confused, okay, in the modern mind. And so that and this is to a large extent due to the influence of people within the sciences, that they want to say that the real is their abstraction, okay. And the thing that's interesting about this assertion, okay, is that if you ask a physicist what is reality, what is the ultimate reality behind their truths, okay, their equations, if they're honest, they'll say they don't know, okay, and they'll say nobody knows, which is true in some sense, unless you want to believe a mystic or something. But basically, there's this confusion that has developed between truth and reality, and so that nowadays there's this idea that patterns, okay, if you there's the distinction between discovery and invention has basically disappeared. And that book by a Nobel laureate, Robert Laughlin, says that basically now you can patent ideas, and if you have a thought, okay, in your head that somebody has already patented, then you would have to pay a royalty to that person for having that idea. So that's why he titled the book, The Crime of Reason. And so things have gotten really off the rails. So in present time, in terms of the distinction between discovery and invention, and so that and just also one other thing, okay, that I want to say, and that's about intuition, okay, because as soon as you use that word, the real, okay, and especially if you make the confusion of saying that truth is what science says. Okay, which is people like Paul Dirac, who was a thorough autistic person. Okay, he had no understanding of poetry or any of that type of stuff. Philosophy, he despised philosophy, and so this idea of letting people like that dictate to us, people who have some kind of semblance of sanity, saying that we're going to let people like that tell us what reality is. Excuse me, no, okay. And so this idea of intuition as being an ability, kind of like vision, like being able to see, hear, smell, taste, and all that, but it's kind of like a form of awareness, okay, and but it's an awareness into reality. It should be distinguished from imagination. And so when you go deeper and deeper and deeper into intuition, you begin to find out that there are aspects of reality that do not jive with the scientific, quote unquote, scientific point of view, like parapsychology, precognition and mental telepathy and things like that. That from their point of view, it's impossible, so therefore it doesn't exist, and they refuse to talk about it. Okay, so the thing is, the point that I'm trying to make here is that this distinction that Hansen makes in his book between the real and the true, okay, is kind of questionable. Okay, but he does kind of mention, does mention in this chapter William James and pragmatism, and that's the way most physicists nowadays, that's kind of how they think. They, because I've talked to them, and I asked them about this whole business with the what's called the measurement problem. What is reality? And they say, well, physics, the purpose of physics is not to tell you what actually exists. The purpose of physics is to predict the outcome of experiments. And that's kind of a pragmatist point of view. So,
Thank you.
So anyway, I just wanted to kind of say that this whole question about what is reality and what is truth, it's not all that simple. Okay.
Thank you. Next up is going to be Allison. Allison, go ahead.
One thing that I've been finding with this book is it's making me see the connections between the different art forms in a way that I hadn't. Like as I read this, I mean, I keep thinking about, like the conversations about architecture, but I'm realizing how similar they are to choreography. And one of the things is, when they're talking about the limitations as an architect, because you have to worry about what the client wants, what materials you have, the space that you have, the landforms around you, things like that, and how they impact the choreography, the architecture. But as a choreographer, you have the same limitations. You're limited by what your dancers are capable of doing. You're limited by ticket sales. That's a huge thing. Usually dances are always arranged in the same way, where you have something kind of light for the first act, and then you put the most serious part in the middle, and then you leave them happy and smiling for the last act, so that they want to buy tickets again. It's like a standard rule in dance. But you're also like, you want to challenge your audience, but you can't do it too much, or they're just not coming back. And so that's always an issue. So I thought that was really interesting, the parallels that I found. The other thing that I really liked was there was one thing in here on page 28 where they talked about how science is only observing what is, it's not creating something. And I feel like, I don't know if it's maybe the last 50 years or I don't know, 100 years, whatever it is, science has just taken over, especially in this country. And I'm not saying that science isn't accurate and doesn't exist. Like, of course it's real, but it's not the whole picture. It's part of the picture. It's not everything. And I feel like when you take this scientific approach and you apply it to everything, particularly schools, it's really bad, because what you wind up with is what we have today, where standardized tests dictate absolutely everything. And when you look at questions on there and they say it has to be, you have to find the right answer. And the fact is, there is not one right answer. It's part of A, part of B, a little of C, and not really D. And that's true for probably 50% of the questions. And it's hard because I'm a teacher now, you're trying to prepare kids, it's kind of like a Kaplan's course, just teaching them how to navigate the test. But really, when you're reading a story, there's so many different interpretations. But I feel like the reason we've gotten to this point is because we've let the scientific mind take over, and we act like the artistic mind is just not serious, and it's not fluffy, it's too fluffy, and it's just not something that's respected, especially in this country. I think it's different in some other countries. But anyway, those are the main things that I've seen that I was really thinking about a lot.
Wonderful. Thank you, Allison. Next up is going to be Maritza, Joe, Laura, and Mike. Maritza.
Hi. My favorite piece in this book is actually of the figure. It's figure 1.2, and it shows a graph, and I was having a little bit more of a struggle with the concept of the ultimate particular until I was able to study this graph. And it's a matter of showing you that we're moving. It's a sliding scale it's curved. So it's not rigid, there's no points here. It's okay, there are points on the line mathematically, but it's not sharp angles.
Maritza, what's the figure number?
1.2.
1.2. I'll try to find it up and put it up. Go ahead.
It's on page 31 if you have the second edition.
Okay, sure.
And you slide from it shows you how you go from simplicity to complexity, and that's how you find the ultimate particular. That's how you get from the true to the real. It's increasing level of concreteness, as it were, and you're going sliding. So that made it just a visual for me, really helped me to understand what we're trying to say here. Another thing that was clear to me was that, I guess looking at this chapter from the big picture, what I feel we're really being told in all these pages is that you can't have one. If you go like this and you only look at the true, everything that you don't see on either side makes what you are looking at lacking in a richness that it would have if you included those other items, those other perspectives. So that's what I mean, like, I guess to make it as simple as I can from just a step back, because I really do think if you get stuck on some of the pieces in the chapter, it could be kind of hard to understand. But if you look at it, the chapter itself kind of as a whole, what is the concept that we're being shown here? And really thank you, Shikan. I like this. So this graph here, I really think it just brings it home. Oops, it went away. It shows just that you start with the true and then you keep sliding along, and that's how you're going to get to the real. And another thing that this graph shows you is that they all coexist on the same line. And that's my ultimate takeaway from this chapter, that you cannot have just one. While your goal is, you want this ultimate particular, you must acknowledge all the other ones that exist as you slide along towards it. And there's in here that it actually, in the chapter, we're actually told that there needs to be a symmetry between the real and the true, and not a polarity. And it says we need to find the unity between the two rather than a compromise. And that was so impactful to me. We want unity. We don't even want to compromise. That's a very strong statement to me. And that's kind of, in my mind, the most important thing to take and to hold on to as I continue exploring the concepts presented to us. And I'm going to stop there, Shrikant, because I think that's the most important line here. Thank you.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you. Next up is going to be Joe, followed by Laura. Joe.
So each chapter that I'm approaching, I'm trying to put it into real context, into something that can be used, whether it be where I work or what I've done in the past. And in my discussions with Becky, actually, it had become readily apparent that some of the things that I was actually looking at were part of the process that she laid out. So initially, I used the true, the real, and the ideal model in a couple of different things. Even one of our meetups, we talked about, John 1 as the word being the true, the real being, Christ, and the man, and then the ideal being Christ, the word becoming flesh. So that was a process per se, and where we used it. Another one where I used it was something with thinking about work. I thought about how we could work within a system with a set of constraints. And I thought, okay, what is real? The real is the enterprise system that we're using. The true would be the schema, because it's a language that I proposed. And the ideal is using that schema in a certain way so that it solves a particular problem of getting rid of a lot of subsystems. And I know that's a little abstract, but I started to use that as a framework. And that's what I tried to, that opened my eyes up to looking at problems a little bit differently. So that's where it was a particular to a specific solution. But then I also looked at I thought the most important part was the idea of change and how does change then occur? And then I started to think about change management strategies that are used within this framework as well. And the idea of starting with intention is the most important. And I kind of actually, that was another thing that came through with my, when I was just having a conversation with Becky, is when you're starting with the particular ideal and you're looking at the process as iterative, then you can kind of start to see all the parts come together. But many times that the idea of you set your intention and you even need to decide, and I took advantage of watching some of Harold Nelson's videos, that you need to decide, like, what is the aim? What type of change that you're actually trying to make? So one of the examples he had used in the video was informing, fixing and repairing, transforming and forming. And the reason why informing is, like, if you're doing research, that's the type of particular that you're then developing. That's the type of goal that you have. That's the intention. That's the particular. If it's fixing and repairing, it could be just you're solving a problem. If it's transforming something, then you're trying to think about how to reinvent businesses or systems themselves. Then you look at what's driving the change. How are you solving the problem? And is it a project or is it a new system? And then what are the constraints around your particular that you're developing? And that's also very important. And the final one is what actions need to be taken. And when you start to think about what actions need to be taken from there, you can start to see the process of how do you bring something, you can start to bring something that is into existence that wasn't previously into existence, and then start the iteration process where you go from the particular ideal to the facts that you're dealing with, the truth, and then the schemas which is the real, and then you go to the process triggers, which actually helps you with your iterations. And then you have the emergence of the ultimate particular that goes back around and it cycles through. I know that wasn't particularly clear, but it did give me a framework. The most important thing that I want to leave everybody with is that it provided me with a framework on how to look and categorize the difference between the true, the real, and the ideal. And that's a very powerful concept to have when you're analyzing a number of problems, because that helps separate what actions that need to be taken in a particular process.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Joe. Next up is going to be Laura, Mike, Marco, and David. Folks, if you would like to share what you got from this chapter, go ahead and type exclamation mark. Laura, what did you get from this chapter?
I'm afraid I'm a little bit like in Mike's category. I see the process. I'm having a hard time working with this book, given my experience with design, which I feel it's very organic for me, and I find it very hard to look at all this analytic decision discussion, and because it just flows. It's kind of like you start the process, and it grows, and and it's very dynamic. It lives and breathes. You talk to it, much like I do in my painting, and it happens, and you see things, and you change it, and you move it, and you do this, and you do that, and you do it all the way through as you see it come alive, and you have to make changes when it's alive. You got to make changes, and you got to make them fast, because otherwise parts are gonna die, and you don't want that to happen. So you got to work fast, and you got to work hard, and you got to think hard, and you got to understand. For me, my problem has always been the students. So I have to think, I have a very big problem. I have lots of students, and they're all my problem, and it's become one problem. And, you can't really consolidate everybody into one ball, but ultimately, there's a problem about learning. So that's the problem. And so I have a really hard time going through all this you know, um, I
Wonderful.
don't know. I can't deal with it. Let's put it that way.
Thank you, Laura. I mean, really appreciate your kind of straightforward comments, because what happens is that different people come at problems using different faculties. So some people, kind of do things intuitively. Some people do things by just using their hands. That's the primary way in which they explore things. So people come at things from different angles, and some things speak to some people. They are more useful to some people than the others. But thank you very much. Really appreciate that. And this is exactly what we're trying to do. We're trying to understand what design is. And it's really great to have different people simply talk about how they see design. So thank you. And the good thing is that, so like everybody knows that you've been doing design of curriculums and design in your own way. So there are multiple ways of approaching design. So thank you. Next up is going to be Mike. Mike 1.
Yeah, I had a little trouble for a while too, thinking that the material I was taking in was a bit abstract, until I was able to plug it into growing up in a machine shop. What my dad had mentioned before was a tool and die maker. And the primary job then for a tool and die maker was to make the prototype. So I took the word true as meaning a customer's need, let's say in 1970. That was a fact. So they would go into my dad, who was a tool and die maker, and say, I have X problem that needs to be solved. And my father would make a prototype, the original design of something that would solve the customer's problem. But the reality is that design has to be mass produced. So let's say he makes a prototype, we'll call it a widget, that solves the customer's need. But now if the customer says, wow, this will work, now I need 1,000 of these. So it has to be mass produced. And what would happen in his machine shop with lathes and millers and drill presses, by today's standards, very basic machinery, is that original design would have to be, again, mass produced. Ideally, so I'll use the word ideal, my dad had a very strong intuition, could sit down, make a blueprint, create the product in his mind, could then know the type of material to use, which machines in what order to mass produce these. But then reality sets in and you start to realize that there's a cost factor now. I have to make 1,000. I know what the customer wants, but now that I have to make 1,000, my choice of material matters now. If I use aluminum as opposed to something cheaper, something lighter, or something heavier affects the price. Well, if it affects the price, then my dad's profit diminishes. If I sell it for too much money, then it affects the market. So the second I was able to put the ideal, the real, and the true back in the 1970s, where I witnessed it in the shop, it became very real for me, very concrete, that analogy. But then flash forward to the meetup that we had Sunday. We're talking about the digital age. And I have absolutely no idea how to plug this information into what's happening now as things are being machined and produced, what country they're being made in. I have no idea how to make the connection from 1970 to 2021. And the thought of what's coming next, how to plug this information into what I feel, especially after Sunday's meetup, is what's coming in the future, is really mind-boggling. So that's what I took from the chapter.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Mike 1. And next up is going to be, let's see here. Give me just a second. It's going to be Marco, David S, and David R. Marco.
Yeah, I've been kind of like reading the book and seeing it from like because I have a bit of an architectural background, and I kept seeing it like from designing a building, but I sort of had listening to tonight's meeting, it was like I sort of had a light bulb moment that, you know, for the first time, like I've been trying to see it from like my own perspective from designing my life. But yeah, but like the light bulb moment is that like that I am the building basically, and so yeah, so I'm kind of glad that I'm seeing it at least from that perspective, and also that there's no sort of like stock design process for like each person. Like we all like we each have to have our own like custom design process and like bettering ourselves. And yeah, that's it.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Marco. Next up is David S, followed by David R. David S.
Hi. Right. So jumping off, I like Maritza's choice of illustrations, the one that shows the real on the bottom axis and the true on the vertical axis, and the curve, which is showing you going from the universal and truths to general truths to particular truths and the full particular and out towards the ultimate particular, which comes down further and further to being the real, the real, the real, closer and closer to what's just singular, instantaneous, momentary, real experience, just at that moment, at that time, there for some human being, that one place. So that's like the ultimate particular realized as the real. And I thought that, yeah, okay, this is beginning to make some sense with this graph, but I think the thing that's missing, and maybe it's not in this chapter, but it's certainly part of the overview and the introduction, and is there's a third dimension on the graph. So if we stay in this graph and we go back to figure 1.4, which is putting 3 columns down, there are 3 columns, they're not 2 columns. There's the real, which was the bottom axis, and there's the ideal, I'm sorry, the true going up, is the vertical axis, and then there's this other direction called the ideal, which we've said how important that is, because that's what makes design, that's what drives, that's the purpose of design. Okay, to take an ideal and make it real. So whichever, yeah, if you you're going to, okay, I'll see what you come up with, either 1.4 or Maritza's. Yeah. So now we have the 3 columns there. I say the book is a little hard because it really is using a little misleading words. I really wish they hadn't called it just the real. It's the being, it's the existing, it's what is and what has being. So you can look outside, you know, turn your eyes and you will look at what is real. The true is what we're aware of. It's what we can know. It's what our ideas are, what our concepts of that are all about. And we refine that and make it truer and truer, the most true we can, right? So the first column, yeah, revealing the particular, it says, it's the it that's there. That's what the real is. So the true is our being conceptual beings and making sense out of everything there. And the relation, if there were only 2 columns, we'd have this constant matching up of what's real, what do I think is true, what's happening, what is my thought about it, and all you'd come up with is the whole science, the whole world of science. You'd make all of your thinking matching everything that's true, and that would be a really, really great place to live and super rational, and we'd be flat on that graph that Maritza was looking at. Okay, but that isn't taking off in the 3rd dimension yet. The ideal is the thing where we bring in our projections and we bring in our reality intender to go in another dimension. This isn't reality, but I'm going to see something that could be reality. I'm using the ideal. The ideal here, idea is the 2nd column. It's what's in our heads. Ideal is the good of things, the value of things, the moral of things, the what should be, the oughts of things, So calling it the ideal is a little messed because most of, when I say idea, I'm mostly talking about mental processes. And ideal, yes, it is a thing that human beings generate and there's a mental aspect to it, but it's the thing that's more than just the knowledge substance, right? It's the value relationship to reality. And we're going to drive reality with the third column and go back. Now we do creative composing. I don't think we only do it in the third column. So I think that made them put the wrong thing in the wrong columns. We do creative composing in science with our ideas to see what ideas work well and which ones don't. And that's our creativity in science. And if you want to call that designing, it's also part of thinking rationally and thinking clearly, which is very formulaic too. Okay, so there's a part of it that does involve what I would rather call play, which is letting the energy of all the elements flow together, and it's going to be a chaotic mishmash, and seeing through it, as was said, for patterns, and making those patterns as they emerge important because some of them are worthwhile. You will value some of those patterns, and those are the ones that you're going to choose to make real, and that's what's driving your direction in design, except for your constraints of money and materials and that, which is the science part. That's your constraints. But it's the idea, look, what's the way in here that really stands out as the beautiful pattern? And beauty is in that third column too. So I really think if they refine some of the things in the columns, it would make sense a lot quicker for me. And so this is an MIT Press book, and the motto of MIT is mens et manus, minds and hands. Okay, you're making, you're doing is your hands. That's the third column, to project things into the future in a way they're not now. That's what your real hands are, your manipulation of the reality, and your mind is looking at it. So there's it and your mind and your hands. That's sort of why I saw 3 columns.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, David. Now it's up to David R. David, go ahead.
So I guess kind of like Maritza, I also found figure 1.2 very interesting. And as I started to kind of, try to understand what he was potentially trying to say with that, I was reflecting back on other projects or programs where I was involved in the design activity. And it started to kind of gel for me because you move from the original problem statement or the need, and then you need to take that from that ideal state into reality, into something that's real, that's going to solve the problem or accomplish the objective. And as you move down that curve, you're going through a process. And I've always found the design multi-layered. So you have maybe the overall design, but within the design, there's smaller designs. And within those designs, there's the other components. So when you have a very complicated structure or a complicated design you're working on, there's designs within designs, but they all have to come together if you're going to get to that. And that's what kind of really started to gel for me when I really kind of started to understand his ultimate predictable is all those little designs now have to come together and they have to work synergistically to get to a functioning and an ultimate solution in reality. And the other thought that I reflected back on was, as I was going through programs, I used a method that I kind of coined it within my own business or company. I worked outside that rigid design process, that well-structured, you go through all these stages and everything. I did things a little bit more on intuition or flexibility. And I used the process that I used was, I refer to it as rapid prototyping. So you would be looking at something at one level and you would have a thought or an idea for direction, for working towards the reality, the real. But it required some assumptions. You had to, things, you didn't have all the answers. So what I found effective was to identify the areas of uncertainty that were key to the solution or key to your direction, and quickly evaluate them, rapidly prototype them. They may not be final. They may not be, as Mike said, you get that prototype, but that prototype you can't take to production. But that prototype very quickly showed you the solution. Now the team can focus on taking the prototype and moving it to that next level down that curve towards reality. And I started this process back when, today you have these the machines, the 3D printing. Okay. So when I got started with quote 3D printing, the media was cornstarch. Not all these wonderful materials that you have today. So we would build rapid prototypes out of cornstarch, but we could physically see them. We could put them together. We could see how they interacted, how they moved with respect to one another. And was it accomplishing our thoughts, our ideas? And we could do that very quickly, within a week or less. We could see, make our vision actually something that the team could interact with. And that process, as I was reading the book and looking at that graph, I could just see myself coming down that curve, rapidly prototyping the design and the pieces, coming together, and then eventually ending at the bottom with a specific ultimate solution. But looking at that solution, in reality, there could have been many, many, many ultimate solutions, depending upon how we came down that curve, how we came down that path, the decisions that occurred, the trade-offs that you made going down that curve would lead you to a unique solution in reality. And how well and how good your team was and the choices that you made during that process would ultimately lead to a solution, and how effective it was at addressing, the requirements or the needs that were put in front of you at the beginning. So that's kind of what I got out of that chapter. I found it very interesting. And once I could start to kind of relate to that figure, and I found that figure very interesting and thought-provoking.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, David. Great observations as always. Folks, what we're going to do is we're going to go to the breakout rooms so we can discuss this amongst ourselves. And when we come back with the best question that you have. All right, so we can continue. So the breakout rooms are going to run only for 20 minutes. And after 20 minutes, you'll be automatically coming back over here and come back with the best question that you have.